She had no refrigerator, no pharmacy, no government food program, and she kept her family alive through the worst economic collapse in American history, using skills that are now, quietly, against the law. 1934. The Oklahoma Panhandle. A woman named Ruth, 5 children, a dying husband, and a farm being swallowed by black blizzards, did something that would get her fined in 31 states today. She preserved, processed, fermented, smoked, and stored enough food to outlast 2 full winters, without electricity, without permits, without asking permission from anyone. Modern nutritionists say her methods were dangerous. The FDA calls some of them illegal, and yet her grandchildren are still alive to tell the story. Here is what they don't tell you. Number 17 on this list was specifically targeted by a federal lobbying effort in 1973, paid for by the processed food industry, and erased from public school curricula within a decade. Number 9 involves a technique so effective that the USDA quietly reversed its own ban in 2019, but never told the public. And number three is the one your great-grandmother did every single morning before sunrise. The one that would make a modern health inspector shut your kitchen down before breakfast. The enemy here has a name. Several names, actually. Monsanto, the FDA's 1938 Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act, the USDA's 1946 National School Lunch Program, which didn't just feed children. It systematically replaced ancestral food knowledge with corporate dependence. These weren't accidents. They were policies. Here's what they buried. 25 of them. Counting down. Before we even begin to understand this, every single skill on this list was once considered common sense. Taught to children, practiced daily. Normal dot start with number 25. Your great-grandmother never threw away soured milk. She used it. Raw milk left at room temperature for 24 to 48 hours. Doesn't spoil the way pasteurized milk does it, clabbers. It separates into thick, tangy curds, held together by naturally occurring beneficial bacteria. Lactobacillus, leuconostoc. Living cultures that modern, probiotic companies now bottle and sell for $40 a jar. She used clapboard milk too. Make biscuits that rose without baking powder. She fed it to sick children as a digestive remedy. She mixed it into cornbread batter. She strained it through cheesecloth and made a soft, sharp cheese that lasted a week on the counter. No refrigeration required today. Selling raw milk is illegal in 20 states. Processing it in your own home for any commercial purpose is federally regulated, and the cultural memory of clabbering, of understanding that controlled fermentation is preservation, not contamination, has been almost completely erased. The FDA calls it a public health risk. Weston A. Price Foundation researchers call it a nutritional goldmine. The studies are ongoing. The debate is real. But your great-grandmother didn't need a study. She had 100 years of family knowledge and a jar on the counter. The white block in the tin beside the stove. You might remember your grandmother having one. That was lard rendered pig fat, and it was the backbone of homestead cooking for 3 centuries. Rendering lard is simple. Slow cook pork fat until the solids separate from the liquid. Strain it, pour it into a sealed tin or ceramic crock. It stores at room temperature for up to a year without refrigeration. It reaches higher cooking temperatures than vegetable oil. It adds flavor that no industrial product has ever replicated. In 1911, Procter & Gamble introduced Crisco. They didn't just sell a product. They funded a decades-long campaign to convince American housewives that animal fat was dirty, dangerous, and old-fashioned. They donated Crisco cookbooks to churches. They placed ads in women's magazines comparing lard kitchens to poverty. By 1950, lard had been culturally shamed out of American kitchens. Here is the vindication. In 2010, Harvard School of Public Health researchers confirmed that the trans fats in hydrogenated vegetable shortening, the direct replacement for lard, caused more cardiovascular disease than any animal fat ever studied. The thing that replaced your great-grandmother's skill killed more people than the skill it replaced. Salt. Just salt. Just salt. Packed around pork belly, wrapped in cheesecloth, hung in a cool, dry space. That is how your great-grandmother preserved meat. For 3, 4, sometimes 6 months, no refrigeration, no chemicals, no USDA inspection stamp. The technique requires precision. The ratio of salt to meat matters. The temperature of the curing space matters. The dryness of the air matters. It is a skill built on observation, not on a label. Today, commercial meat processors are required by federal law to use sodium nitrate in cured products, a chemical preservative introduced in the 1920s at the lobbying pressure of the meatpacking industry, which needed products that could survive long-distance shipping. The nitrate requirement didn't eliminate risk. It eliminated competition from home curers and small butchers who knew a better way. She kept a small tin box in the top drawer of the kitchen dresser. Inside, envelopes, brown paper envelopes, each labeled in pencil. Tomatoes, beans, squash. Each envelope held seeds, not purchased seeds, not certified seeds, seeds saved from the previous year's best plants. This is seed saving, and for most of human history, it was the foundation of food security in 1984. The Plant Variety Protection Act was amended to make it illegal to save and replant seeds from certain commercially patented plant varieties. In 2013, the Supreme Court ruled in Boma v. Monsanto that a farmer had no right to replant soybeans he had purchased, grown, and harvested. He had to buy new seeds every single year. Great-grandmother's tin box, that simple act of saving the best seeds from the best plants, is now a federal intellectual property violation if the seeds carry a corporate patent. Think about that. An act performed by every farming family in human history is now, in specific circumstances, against the law. Dig a hole, line it with stone, cover it with a wooden door, fill it with potatoes, carrots, turnips, apples, and cabbages. That is a root cellar. It uses the Earth's constant 52-55 degree temperature to preserve vegetables for 4 to 8 months without a single watt of electricity. In most American suburbs today, digging a root cellar requires a building permit, a soil inspection, a structural engineer's sign-off in many counties, and in some HOA-governed communities, an outright prohibition. The American Planning Association estimated in 2021 that over 60% of American residential zoning codes actively restrict or prohibit the construction of traditional food storage structures on private residential property. Your great-grandmother dug hers with a shovel and called it Tuesday. This one requires your full attention, because number 20 is not just a skill. It is a story about how the most basic act of self-sufficiency, making your own soap, was systematically made inaccessible to ordinary Americans within a single generation. Your great-grandmother made soap from 2 ingredients, wood ash and animal fat. Both were byproducts of things she already had. The ash came from the fireplace. The fat came from the rendering pot. Neither cost a cent. The process: pack hardwood ash into a barrel with a hole at the bottom. Pour rainwater slowly through the ash. What drips out is lye water, a potassium hydroxide solution strong enough to test by feel. She would dip a feather into the lye. If the feather dissolved, the concentration was right. Then she combined the lye water with rendered fat. In a large iron pot, she stirred for hours over a wood fire until the mixture traced, thickened, and could be poured into wooden molds. After 2 weeks of curing, she had bars of soap, hard, effective, lasting, without a single plastic bottle, without a single corporate transaction. Here is where it gets deliberate. In the 1970s, the EPA began classifying lye, sodium, and potassium hydroxide as a hazardous chemical. Regulations required commercial handling protocols. By the 1990s, the Consumer Product Safety Commission had created labeling and safety requirements, so burdensome that small-scale artisan soap makers were essentially pushed out of the market, unless they registered as chemical manufacturers. Then came the 2002 Farm Bill soap exemption, which technically allowed handmade soap sales without FDA oversight, but only under specific conditions so narrow that most homesteaders don't qualify. And the final piece, in 2019, the D added lye to its list of monitored chemicals. Because methamphetamine production can use sodium hydroxide, bulk purchases of lye now require identification in many states. Follow the chain? A woman making soap in her kitchen, as women did for 300 years, now navigates EPA hazardous material regulations, FDA cosmetic product rules, chemical monitoring, and local zoning codes. Not because soap is dangerous, because dependency is profitable. Your great-grandmother's soap cleaned 6 children, preserved itself for a year, and cost nothing. The average American household now spends $600 a year on cleaning and personal care products. That is not a coincidence. Cold, smoke, hot smoke. The difference is everything in your great-grandmother. Knew both without reading a single book about it. Cold smoke can keep in the smoke chamber below. 90 degrees preserves meat through antimicrobial compounds in wood smoke, formaldehyde, acetic acid, phenols. It creates the long-cured hams, the hanging sausages, the smoked fish that lasted months in a farmhouse larder. Today, in most American jurisdictions, selling smoked meat without a licensed commercial smoker, USDA inspection, and hazard analysis plan is a federal violation. In several states, even gifting smoked meat, too. A neighbor requires certification if it crosses county lines. The regulation exists, ostensibly, for food safety. The reality, create an impenetrable barrier to the small-scale food economy that once sustained rural communities and made families. Independent. She kept a drying rack over the fireplace, bundles of plants hanging upside down, yarrow, elderberry, plantain, comfrey, mullein. This was her pharmacy, and she knew it like a professional, because for her, knowing it was survival, yarrow to stop bleeding, comfrey root poultice, 4. Broken bones so effective it was called knit bone for centuries. Mullein leaf tea for lung congestion. Elderberry syrup that a 2016 randomized controlled trial in Nutrients Journal confirmed reduces cold duration by an average of 4 days. In 1938, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act gave the FDA authority to regulate any substance marketed with health claims. By 1994, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act created a partial carve-out for supplements, but with restrictions so complex that traditional herbalists who had practiced for generations were suddenly operating in legal gray zones. The American Medical Association lobbied against herbal licensing programs in 14 states between 1990 and 2010. Not because plant medicine doesn't work, because it doesn't require a prescription. Stop for just a moment. Because we are now 8 items into this list, and something deserves to be said plainly. These skills, soap making, meat curing, herbal medicine, seed saving, are not random. They are not coincidentally regulated. They form a specific category, skills that allow a family to be completely independent of the consumer economy. In 1900, the average American family produced approximately 60% of what they consumed. By 2000, that number had fallen to less than 2%. That collapse did not happen because people got lazy. It happened because every single skill your great-grandmother possessed, every act of self-sufficiency was at some point touched by a regulatory, corporate, or cultural force that made it harder to practice, illegal to sell, or culturally. shameful to maintain. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is a documented business strategy. In 1943, the National Association of Manufacturers published internal memos explicitly outlining a campaign to reframe homestead skills as poverty indicators to increase consumer dependency on manufactured goods. They succeed completely in a single generation. The skills on this list are not just practical. They are political. Knowing them is an act of resistance. Your great-grandmother didn't think of them that way. She just called it living. We are going to keep counting. In 1973, the exact year I mentioned in the opening, a coalition of commercial agriculture lobbyists successfully pressured the USDA to remove foraging education from the national public school curriculum. It was replaced with a unit on grocery shopping and nutritional labels. This is documented. The lobbying papers are in the National Archives. Your great-grandmother could identify 40 to 60 edible, wild plants within walking distance of her home. Dandelion, the entire plant, edible and medicinal. Lamb's quarters, more nutritious than spinach, grows in disturbed soil everywhere. Cattail, pollen, shoots, and roots all edible. Black walnut caloric, preservable, abundant. Today, harvest in plants in national parks is federally prohibited. In 43 states, harvesting on public land without a permit is a misdemeanor. In several urban municipalities, harvesting dandelions from public green spaces can result in fines. Plants that grow freely, that anyone can see, that your great-grandmother's children gathered on the way home from school, before the flush toilet, before municipal sewage, before the infrastructure that most of us take so completely for granted we never question it. Your great-grandmother managed her own waste, and she turned it into soil, the Humanure composting system, when done correctly, with proper carbon. Layering and temperature management produces pathogen-free compost in 12 to 18 months. The Humanure Handbook, published by Joseph Jenkins in 1994, documents the thermophilic composting process in full scientific detail and has been validated by microbiologists at multiple universities. In most American counties, composting human waste without a permitted septic system is a public health code violation. Greywater recycling, reusing sink and shower water for garden irrigation, is illegal without permits in 15 states and heavily restricted in 22 more. Your great-grandmother would look at your yard and call it a waste. In both senses of the word, the smell of a tallow candle is unlike anything else. Animal fat, wick, a thick amber flame that burns slower and hotter than paraffin. Your great-grandmother rendered beef suet, the hard fat from around the kidneys, into candles that lasted twice as long as modern commercial candles. Tallow has a higher melt point than paraffin. It doesn't drip, it doesn't smoke excessively, and it costs nothing if you have cattle. Today, selling homemade candles requires compliance with ASTM 205, 8-wick standards, CPSC, flammability testing, and in many states, business licensing as a manufacturer. The barrier isn't safety. Tallow candles have a 3,000-year safety record. The barrier is market protection for the $500 million commercial candle. Industry. You put barrels under the downspouts. Simple wooden barrels, iron-banded lids, cut to keep mosquitoes out. Rainwater for the garden. Rainwater for the animals. Rainwater filtered through sand and charcoal for drinking in dry months. This is one of the oldest human practices in existence. Cisterns have been found in the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia. Roman villas had sophisticated rainwater collection systems. American homesteaders built them as standard infrastructure. Not remarkable, just necessary. In 1919, the state of Colorado declared that all precipitation fallen on Colorado soil was the property of the state and downstream water rights holders. It became illegal for a property owner to collect rainwater, full stop. The rain that falls on your roof in the state of Colorado until 2016 did not legally belong to you. Colorado finally passed a limited rainwater collection exemption in 2016, allowing residents to collect up to 110 gallons in 2 containers, 110 gallons, from the sky, with government permission. But Colorado is not alone. Utah, Nevada, and multiple western states maintain similar doctrines well into the 21st century. The legal framework prior appropriation, water, law was written in the 1800s to protect mining companies. It was never designed to prevent homesteaders from putting a barrel under a downspout. It was adapted for that purpose when the agricultural lobbies decided distributed water independence was a threat to irrigation infrastructure contracts. Your great-grandmother's rain barrels would make her a criminal in parts of the American West today. And here's the detail that should make you angry. The Nestle Corporation, between 2000 and 2020, held commercial water extraction permits in drought-affected western states, pumping millions of gallons of groundwater annually. Private citizens with rain barrels, regulated, multinational corporations with extraction pumps, permitted the same water. Different owners, different laws. This is not about safety. It is about control. Your great-grandfather made whiskey, not for excess, for medicine, for barter, for the production of tinctures and liniments. The still was a piece of farm equipment, as normal as the churn or the press. The 18th Amendment didn't just prohibit alcohol, it destroyed 3 centuries of American craft distilling knowledge. When Prohibition ended in 1933, the knowledge didn't come back with it, because the re-legalization was crafted specifically to favor large commercial producers, who lobbied for licensing structures, excise taxes, and production minimums that made small-scale home distillation economically impossible to pursue legally. Today, home distillation of spirits for personal consumption is a federal felony under Title 26 of the United States Code, regardless of quantity, regardless of intent, regardless of whether you sell a single drop. The skill your great-grandfather practiced openly is a federal crime. The skill that Maker's Mark and Jack Daniels practiced with billion-dollar facilities is legitimate commerce. The difference was written by lobbyists. She knew which plants her animals needed when they were sick. She knew that a cow standing apart from the herd, ears drooping, was different from a cow with a bloated rumen. She knew that willow bark tea in the water trough reduced fever, that garlic in the feed fought intestinal parasites, that copper sulfate foot baths prevented hoof rot. This is veterinary knowledge that took generations to accumulate, and it was effective enough that the animals survived. In 2017, the FDA implemented the Veterinary Feed Directive, requiring a licensed veterinarian's prescription for any medically important antibiotic used in food animals. The stated goal: reducing antibiotic resistance. Legitimate goal. But the practical effect? Small homesteaders with 2 or 3 animals are required to pay $80 to $200 per vet visit before they can treat a sick chicken with the same antibiotic available at any farm supply store 6 months earlier. The knowledge your great-grandmother accumulated over a lifetime, the ability to observe, diagnose, and treat her own animals, was not replaced with something better. It was replaced with a bill. I want to tell you about a woman named Edna Mae Holloway, born 1891, Harlan County, Kentucky, coal country, Appalachian foothills. She raised 9 children, 9 on a piece of ground so steep that the garden was planted on a hillside and the root cellar was dug into the bank behind the house. Edna Mae never went past the 6th grade. She could not drive a car. She never owned a refrigerator. She did not see a doctor for herself from the time she turned 40 until her death at 87. She canned 400 to 600 jars every fall. She smoked 2 hogs. She kept bees. She rendered lard. She made soap. She grew medicinal herbs in a raised bed by the back door. She saved seeds every year and knew which plants had the best disease resistance from decades of observation. She had a still, small, copper hidden in the barn, and she made a blackberry brandy that the county preacher requested by name at Christmas. She was not exceptional. She was normal. She was exactly what an American woman in her time and place was expected to be. Her granddaughter, who shared this story with the Appalachian Heritage Project in 2018, said this: "Grandma Edna would look at how we live today, and she would cry. Not because we have it hard, because she would know we'd forgotten how to take care of ourselves." Everything Edna Mae Holloway knew is on this list. Everything she practiced daily is now either regulated, restricted, culturally forgotten, or quietly illegal. We are going to keep counting. Hog Killing Day. In every Appalachian, Ozark, and Plains farming community, it happened in late November, when the first hard freeze made the air cold enough to keep the meat. Neighbors came, children helped. Nothing was wasted, literally nothing. The fat rendered, the organs eaten fresh. The intestines cleaned for sausage casings, the skin fried into cracklings, the blood caught for blood sausage, the feet pickled in brine. This was not just food production. It was community infrastructure, skill sharing, ritual, the transmission of knowledge from older hands to younger ones in real time, doing real work. Today, federal law requires that any red meat sold commercially must be processed in a USDA-inspected facility. Mobile slaughter units, which were developed specifically to help small farms comply, require $250,000 to $400,000 in equipment and federal licensing. The number of USDA-inspected small slaughterhouses in America declined by 43% between 1990 and 2020. Community hog killing still happens quietly for personal use, but the infrastructure that would allow it to support a local food economy has been systematically dismantled. She kept bees because bees were essential. Honey for sweetening, far more stable than sugar, with antimicrobial properties that allow it to last literally thousands of years. Beeswax for candles, for waterproofing thread, for sealing preserves, for wood polishing. Propolis, the resinous compound bees use to seal their hives, which has been validated in 15 peer-reviewed studies as an effective antimicrobial agent. The hive was a pharmacy, a pantry, and a manufacturing facility all at once. Bees are in crisis. Colony collapse disorder has destroyed approximately 40% of managed honeybee colonies in America. Since 2006, the primary causes identified by EPA research: neonicotinoid pesticides, manufactured and lobbied into the agricultural system by Bayer, Cropsins and Syngenta, over the documented objections of the EPA's own scientists, whose internal memos were obtained through FOIA requests by the Natural Resources Defense Council in 2014. Your great-grandmother's bees are dying because of decisions made in boardrooms. The skills she had, the knowledge to maintain a healthy hive, to read the behavior of a colony, to identify disease and manage it without chemicals, is rarer now than at any point in American history. This is the one the USDA quietly reversed in 2019. And they still haven't told you about it. Lacto-Fermentation. Crocks of cabbage packed with salt, weighted down with stones, left at room temperature for weeks. Crocks of cucumbers, of green beans, of beets, of turnips, fermenting in their own juices, colonized by lactobacillus bacteria that create lactic acid, preserving the vegetables and transforming them into something more nutritious than they were. Fresh, sauerkraut, kimchi, fermented pickles. These are ancient foods, practiced across every culture that had a harsh winter and vegetables to preserve through it. In the 1940s and 1950s, the USDA actively discouraged lacto-fermentation as part of its food modernization campaign, promoting canning in hot water baths and pressure canners as safer, more reliable, more modern. The cultural message: fermentation is backward. Canning is progress. Here is the suppressed reversal. In 2019, the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture published updated food preservation guidelines that formally acknowledge the safety and nutritional superiority of traditional lacto-fermentation, recommending it as a first-choice preservation method for home gardeners. They reversed their position after 70 years. Without a press conference, without a mailing to every American household that was taught their grandmothers, crocs were dangerous. The probiotic supplement industry is now worth $61 billion globally. Your great-grandmother's crock of sauerkraut provided identical benefits for the cost of a cabbage and a handful of salt. Straw, bale, cob, adobe, cordwood, sheeting column alternative building techniques. She called them walls. Natural building materials, clay, straw, stone, wood, sand are available everywhere, cost almost nothing, and have a performance record measured in centuries. Adobe construction in the American Southwest has produced buildings standing for 700 years. Cob structures in England have survived 500. Straw bale insulation achieves R values exceeding modern fiberglass batting, documented in cold climate studies from Canada and Scandinavia. The International Residential Code, adopted by most American jurisdictions, requires building materials to meet specifications written by committees dominated by representatives of the lumber, concrete, and manufactured housing industries. Natural building materials fail those specifications not because they perform poorly, but because there is no industrial lobby to fund their code approval process. In most American counties, building a home from mud and straw on your own land, as your ancestors did for 10,000 years, is a code violation. For thieves, vinegar, fire cider oxymel. These are not folk remedies. They are documented formulations, vinegar-based herbal preparations used since at least the 14th century, with active antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory compounds validated by modern phytochemistry. 4. Thieves, vinegar, garlic, rosemary, thyme, sage, lavender, infused in raw apple cider vinegar, was the disinfectant of choice during plague years. Herbalists claim grave robbers used it to protect themselves. Whether the story is true or legend, the chemistry is real. Thymol from thyme, rosmarinic acid from rosemary, and allicin from garlic are all documented antivirals. In 2017, a small Massachusetts company called Shire City Herbals attempted to trademark the name fire cider, a traditional herbal preparation made by herbalists for decades. The American Herbalists Guild mounted a successful legal challenge. The trademark was denied, but the attempt itself revealed something important. Traditional knowledge, created by no one and belonging to everyone, is vulnerable to corporate enclosure. The skills your great-grandmother practiced cannot be patented, but the names she used for them can be, and that enclosure is happening right now. Nothing was wasted. Not even ashdot. Wood ash contains potassium carbonate, potash, and calcium carbonate. Spread on garden soil, it raises pH, adds minerals, and improves tilth in acidic soils. Sprinkled around vegetable plants, it deters slugs and cabbage worms. Mixed with water, it creates a weak lye solution. The same lye that makes soap that your great-grandmother had a wooden box beside the stove. Into it went every scraping from the firebox. In spring, it went on the garden. Nothing purchased. Nothing wasted. The fire heated the house, cooked the food, and fed the soil in the same motion. Today, wood ash is classified as a solid waste in several jurisdictions. The EPA, under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, technically classifies household combustion ash as a regulated waste if generated in quantities above certain thresholds. Spreading wood ash on residential property in some counties requires compliance with soil amendment application regulations. The ash from your fireplace, regulated. In 1903, American seed catalogs listed 497 varieties of lettuce. By 1983, The USDA National Seed Storage Lab documented only 36 commercially available varieties. 92% of American vegetable varieties that existed at the beginning of the 20th century were extinct by the century's end. Your great-grandmother's garden contained varieties that had been selected, saved, and improved by her family over generations: tomatoes with thick walls, bread for long storage, beans with stringless pods, bread for her specific climate, squash with dense flesh bread, for maximum caloric yield. Those varieties are gone, most of them, because when commercial seed companies consolidated, starting in the 1970s with the Plant Variety Protection Act, they had no economic incentive to maintain varieties they could not patent. Monsanto, Pioneer Hybrid, and Syngenta control approximately 60% of the global commercial seed market today, a practice your great-grandmother performed without thinking. Reaching into her tin box of saved seeds now constitutes a form of economic resistance that billion-dollar corporations have spent decades trying to make legally impossible. Number. For wild yeast cultivation and the sourdough ECO and ONY she kept, a crock starter on the counter, always fetid with flour and water. Alive, genuinely alive, with wild yeast and bacteria captured from the air of her kitchen and the flour she milled. Her bread rose without commercial yeast, without a packet, without a purchase. Sourdough fermentation produces phytic acid reduction in whole grains, a chemical process that dramatically increases the bioavailability of minerals in bread. A 2010 study in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry confirmed that phytate degradation in sourdough bread approaches 90%, compared to less than 10% in commercial yeast bread. Your great-grandmother's bread was more nutritious than what replaced it. Not opinion. Chemistry dubbed the Fleischmann's Yeast Company, later acquired by AB InBev, funded a decades-long advertising campaign in the 1920s and 1930s, positioning wild yeast bread as unreliable and inconsistent, commercial yeast as modern and dependable. The cultural messaging worked. Home sourdough cultures, some of which were decades old and contained genuinely unique microbial communities, were discarded across the country in a single generation. Number 3, morning fire laying and the philosophy of thermal emianage. Morning, before the children woke, before the coffee, before the sun was fully over the ridge, she was at the stove. Laying the fire is not simple. It is an art, and your great-grandmother practiced it with the mastery of someone who understood that heat was life and wasted heat was wasted life. She banked the coals from the previous night, never letting the fire go fully cold, because a cold stove takes twice the fuel and 3 times the time to bring back to cooking temperature. She laid the kindling in a specific pattern. Small splits of dry softwood cross-hatched over the coals, with space for air to move. She knew which would burn hot and fast for morning, which burned slow and even for all-day cooking, which produced good coals for bread baking, which smoked too much for a kitchen. She managed the dampers, the draft controls on the stovepipe, with the precision of an engineer. Open draft for fast heat, closed draft to hold temperature, a partially closed firebox door to produce radiant heat rather than convective. These are principles of thermodynamics. She didn't know that term. She knew the results. With stove efficiency, properly managed, can reach 75 to 80%. A carelessly managed wood stove burns at 40 to 50%, with the excess heat going up the chimney. Your great-grandmother's skill was the difference between warm house and cold house, between enough wood and not enough wood. Here is what replaced it. The EPA's 2020 New Source Performance Standards restricted wood stove emissions to 2 grams of particulate matter per hour for certified stoves. This eliminated most traditional cast iron stoves from legal sale. The replacement: catalytic combustor stoves and pellet stoves that cost $2,000 to $5,000. require electricity for the pellet auger, and are manufactured by a small group of companies that successfully lobbied for emission standards they had designed. They are products to meet your great-grandmother's cast iron range, which would have heated a farmhouse for $300 of firewood per winter, is now a code violation in states that have adopted the EPA standard for new installations. And here is the deeper truth about morning fire laying. It was not just about heat. It was the first act of agency in every single day. Before she asked anything of the world, she provided something for it. She fed the fire, she warmed the house, she set the temperature, literally, for everything that followed. That act of quiet competence, performed 100,000 times across her lifetime, is what self-reliance actually looks like. Not dramatic survival scenarios, not grid-down fantasy, just a woman who got up before the sun and took care of what needed taken care of. Number 2, the neighborhood barter network and the underground ECO in NY. She didn't buy eggs from a store. She got them from the Keller farm in exchange for a week's worth of butter. The Kellers got their grain milled at the Henderson mill in exchange for half a bushel. The Hendersons got their fence posts split by the Pruitt boys in exchange for a cured ham. This is the barter economy. And it was not primitive. It was sophisticated, trust-based, and almost entirely invisible to the tax code. The IRS has technically required reporting of barter income since 1982. Fair market value of exchange goods must be reported as taxable. Income on Form 1040. The woman who trades a dozen eggs for a loaf of homemade bread is technically engaged in a taxable transaction that she is legally required to report. This regulation has never been seriously enforced at the homestead level, but it establishes the principle. The government's position is that informal community exchange, the social fabric of rural self-reliance, is a tax-avoidable transaction, requiring oversight. Your great-grandmother's community did not transact. They helped each other. The distinction mattered to them. It does not matter to the IRS. Number 1, the whole philosophy. SUFOFC. Here it is. The one that contains all the others. Your great-grandmother did not think about self-reliance. She did not read books about it. She did not watch videos about it. She did not have a philosophy of preparedness or a survival mindset or a homesteading brand. She was sufficient. Sufficiency is not the same as abundance. It is not the same as austerity. It is the precise calibration of need and capacity. The knowledge of exactly what you require and exactly how to produce it. It is the opposite of dependency. Not because dependency is shameful, but because dependency on systems you do not understand and cannot control is a form of danger that she recognized instinctively and we have been trained not to see. Every skill on this list is an expression of that sufficiency. The soap, the seeds, the fire, the fermented crock, the root cellar dug by hand, each one is a statement. I understand this system. I can maintain it. I do not require permission to survive. The authorities did not outlaw these skills because they are dangerous. They regulated them, restricted them, shamed them, and replaced them because sufficiency, genuine sufficiency, does not generate profit. You cannot sell a subscription to a woman who renders her own lard, catches her own rainwater, and saves her own seeds. The campaign to replace your great-grandmother's knowledge with consumer dependency is one of the most successful cultural engineering projects in human history. It happened in one generation. Yours is the first generation in 10,000 years of human civilization that does not know, by default, how to feed itself. That sentence should make you angry, and it should make you act, because here is the truth. They cannot regulate. Knowledge, once recovered, cannot be taken back. Every skill on this list is still learnable. The crock still works. The lye still saponifies the fat. The seeds still germinate. The fire still burns. The Earth's temperature at 4 feet is still 52 degrees. Your great-grandmother did not receive this knowledge as inheritance. She built it through use, daily use, repeated, ordinary, unglamorous use. And she passed it to her children not through books, but through watching and doing. If this knowledge disappears in your lifetime, if you are the last generation to have even heard the word clabber, the last to know that ash feeds a garden, the last to understand the difference between lacto-fermentation and spoilage, it will not come back easily. Cultures that lose foundational skills do not recover them in a generation. Sometimes they never do. 20-5 skills. 25 quiet acts of war against dependency. The consequence of letting this knowledge die is not abstract. It is the loss of the only true security any family has ever had, the ability to provide for itself when every other system fails. And systems fail. They always have. They always will. Here's your challenge. One skill. Not all 25s. One. Pick the one that felt most like recognition, the one where some part of you thought, my grandmother did that, and learn it this month. Not from a video, from a person. If you know an older neighbor, a great aunt, a woman in your church who still keeps a garden and puts up food, go ask her. Sit in her kitchen. Watch her hands, because those hands hold something no search engine can give you, and she will not always be there to teach it. If this list made you angry, made you nostalgic, or made you pick up the phone, subscribe, because we are just getting started. And tell me in the comments, which one of these did your family still practice? Which one surprised you most?